Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, fine. How are you?
Fine, very well. Very
So,
sunny day here in Santiago.
okay. So, can you see us?
Yes.
Okay. So, another talk is by Cristián Santibáñez, and I will give you the word. So, please go on.
Okay, well, I'm very happy to be there, although it's a lie, I'm not there. So that's the first lie. But let's go directly to the job. So attempts to define lying generally appeal to the notion of assertion. Lying is widely held to involve asserting something that the speaker believes to be false and distinguish it from other form of verbal deception. Well, this happens in all kind of type of speech acts. Declaratives are the more prototypical, but also can be seen in expressive speech acts. Some authors suggest that assertion should be analyzed in terms of a Christian maxim of quality, according to which one should only say what she believes to be true. Lying is then defined as a violation of that maxim. According to Stalnaker, an assertion is an attempt to modify the common ground of propositions accepted by the participants in a conversation. Sorry. A second. Yes. Because the notion of belief, truth, and falsity are themselves explicated in terms of assertion, theories that treat assertion as fundamental cannot simply define lying as asserting without the requisite of belief, nor as treating as true something which one believes to be false. It needs to be spelled out, therefore, how such accounts can accommodate the concept of lying as a means of verbal deception individuated by its assertoric nature. Doing so will bring out the tight relationship between the capacity to lie and the capacity to assert. So the philosopher Dummett, I don't know if I pronounce it well, we are going to consider this approach, then the approach of Brno, and then I'm going to say something about the notion of the couple representation to finish with. Assertions, to the philosopher language, are those utterances which can be used to deceive, for example, to lie, and which can also occur, perhaps deprived of some sign of assertoric force, as constituents of complex sentences. Before the child can be said to make assertions, he must learn to respond to assertions of others. Indeed, it must be proper to say of him that he says what he does in order to elicit the appropriate response from others. In this sense, we may say that the child cannot assert anything until he can lie. Is this insight which underlies Grice's account of meaning? Now, the assertion for Dummett is a conventional practice. There is a convention such that declarative sentences are uttered with the intention of uttering only true ones. Thus, uttering a declarative sentence commits the speaker to the truth of the proposition thereby expressed, where this amounts to a commitment to act in accordance with the assertions one makes or assents to. But asserting also requires knowing the condition under which it's appropriate to do so. So becoming an asserter requires learning the condition under which an assertion is justified. The conditions that justify the making of an assertion may also be those that determine its truth, but this not to be the case. But this need not to be the case. We make many justified assertions even though the condition of their truth do not obtain. Predictions and expression of intention being two cases in point. Hence, the conditions that justify the making of an assertion and the condition for its truth need not be identical. A justified assertion is not necessarily one whose content is true. Because assertions are distinguished by the condition that justify them and the consequences they have. Sorry? There is sounds. Again, because assertions are distinguished by the conditions that justify them and the consequences they have, both for the speaker and for those who assent to the assertion, treating as an utterance and assertion also require recognizing that the act commits the speaker and any who assent to the assertion to a particular line of action. Assertions thus constrain and guide behavior. This is a very important topic issue here, both linguistic and non-linguistic. To be sure, other speech acts such as commands and questions also direct behavior, but they do so by virtue of being uttered to a specific addressee, so that he is now to comply with the command or answer the question. Assertions are different in that they affect behavior in much the same ways as perception. Just as those who see the bears by the lake will generally seek to avoid the lake, so those who hear it asserted that there is bears by the lake will seek to avoid the lake, regardless of whether they are the addressees of the utterance. Utterance can do serve as perception by proxy. To count as an asserter, a speaker needs to be aware of the inferential and practical consequences of what she utters, and this needs to motivate her utterance. But once this awareness is achieved, she becomes a potential liar, for she has the option of uttering a declarative sentence for the sake of the consequences of doing so rather than simple because of the condition for doing so obtained. That is to say, on damned accounts, a competent asserter is able to perform these acts in order to guide the behavior of others due to the awareness of the consequences of the act that is implicit in that competence. It is this awareness that gives her the capacity to lie. Following a classical perspective like Frege, it's common to think of assertion as the expression of belief. Frege saw assertion as the exteriorization of an internal act of judgment. One first grasps a thought, then judges it true, and finally makes manifest those internal acts by uttering a sentence that expresses the thought judged truth. Dummett argues that this gets the order of explanation wrong. According to the philosopher Dummett, because the notion of belief is reliant on the notion of truth, the explication of belief requires prior explication of the notion of truth. Truth, however, can only be explicated by considering what counts as treating as true. Dummett holds and treating as true is best explained in terms of acting in accordance with the consequences of assertion. On pain of circularity, then assertion cannot be explained in terms of belief. Rather, belief must be explained in terms of disposition to assert. To attribute the belief that P to an individual is to attribute to him the disposition to assert that P. Well, now we take the Brandon perspective. So he goes in to say that we must view the attribution of a belief as an attribution of a disposition to assert. So how is lying to be accounted for in such a framework? Recent work on definition of lying leans towards the view that lying essentially involves asserting coupled with the absence of belief in the content of the assertion. In Brandon's model, belief is a perspectival notion. To ascribe a belief to another, and his framework, is to ascribe to that person a commitment to defend an assertion. For example, to write it on that person's scorecard. Lying involves assertion in the absence of belief. Because it rests on the absence of belief, lying must also be treated as perspectival notion in a Brandon's framework. We need, therefore, to consider what is to lie from two perspectives, that of the hearer and that of the speaker. from a hearer perspective, to accuse a speaker of lying is a special kind of challenge to her assertion. The challenge is not simply a request for justification, but an accusation that the speaker cannot provide acceptable reason for the assertion she makes. The hearer may try to trap the alleged liar by repeated challenge of her assertion and the justification she offers. In doing so, he in effect tries to demonstrate that she is seeking to engineer a disparity between the scorecard the hearer keeps of the speaker commitments and the speaker's own scorecard of her own commitments. In other words, the hearer accuses the speaker of keeping two scorecards for herself, a private one and another on which she writes the commitment she undertakes in the interaction with judge to be mendacious. From a speaker's perspective, the decision to lie amounts to a decision to engage in double entry, scorekeeping. One scorecard has opened the commitments one sees oneself as committed to. These are assertions one will make if the desirability to the speaker of the consequences were not an issue for consideration. For some reason, however, the consequences of undertaking these commitments are undesirable, and hence the liar seeks to avoid undertaking them, opting instead to undertake commitments whose consequences are more desirable. In general then, concern about the consequences of assertion motivate lying on the Brno model. The liar either wishes to avoid undertaking certain commitment, to have the hearer undertake commitment that the liar presents herself as having on her own scorecard but does not in fact see as justified, or to have the hearer attribute to her commitments other than those she attributes to herself. This required a grasp of the perspectival nature of the scorekeeping game as presented by Brno. On Brno's account, there is not a featured scorekeeper. Rather, each participant keeps a scorecard for himself and another for each of his interlocutors. It's a participant's awareness of the fact that the consequences of acceptance can differ from each participant depending on the collateral commitments that counts. On Brno's model, as grasping the representation nature of assertion. Without this awareness, lying would not be possible, as it is only with a grasp of the representational nature of assertion that the notion of falsity can also be grasped. According to this view combining Zommet and Brno, full competence in assertion amounts to a capacity to lie and vice versa. Competence in assertion is a prerequisite for grasp of the notion of belief, and the practice of assertion involves the deployment of conventional sign, assertion being recognized as such by their form. This last point is stressed by Zommet, but it applies also to Brno. Making a move in the game of giving and requiring reason is shown by the use of the right sort of counter, namely the declarative mood. If this philosophical stance towards assertion and lying is transposed to the empirical study of the development of assertion and lying in children, then certain prediction can be formulated. I'm using a Jari perspective work on this topic. I'm going to mention three consequences or predictions, and then I'm going to give you some idea of the couplet representation to understand the use of lies using assertion. The first is that language, especially through declarative, should be a precursor to the development of notion of belief. This is because the notion of belief is grounded in competence in assertion, which requires being able to recognize an assertion by virtue of a form of conventionally associated with this speech act. The second prediction is that sensitivity to lies and the development of a conception belief should emerge in tandem, for they amount to a grasp of the representational nature of discourse. This leads to a further prediction, namely that the development of sensitivity to lying should be related to the development of perspective-taking abilities. For perspective-taking is claimed to underlie the ability to attribute belief to others. Thus, it appears that a full conception of belief cannot be acquired without prior competence in the syntax required for reporting assertive speech act, and furthermore, that training in this syntax, particularly in deceptive context, facilitates this acquisition. The third prediction is that the development of a conception of belief should be found to be related to an ability to take the perspective of others, for, as we already saw, the software scorekeeping model proposed by Brno. And perspective-taking has indeed been shown to be related to the ability to pass the false belief task. There are many studies about that, as you may know. So, in my view, the best way to understand the notion of perspective-taking, random notion, we should or may use the notion of decoupled representation. And I'm going to give you some detail about this idea. So, according to Sterelny, the philosopher of biology, organisms evolve equipped with control systems so that they can survive in highly competitive environment. That's one of my conclusions already. The idea of we lie because we are involved in a very competitive environments. These control systems are represented as detection systems to detect food, sign of threat, sex mate, etc., etc. That can, with certain degree of accuracy, generate adaptive behavior in transparent environment. In other words, in those transparent environments where the contingencies do not make the signs very brusquely, the sign does not vary, the demand is low in terms of information process. But in translucent environment, that is, where a sign can have more than just one value, and the agent is forced to create a more sophisticated behavior so as to respond correctly to a contextual challenge, the detection system is not enough. And therefore, the evolutionary pressure generates robust tracking mechanisms. When the environment is epistemically speaking less traceable, vagueness, for example, in pragmatics, the organism creates a connection between one of the environment tracking aspect and the richness of its behavioral response. For example, an agent can receive what seems to be a warning signal indicating that a threat is getting closer, similar to when a predator is in the vicinity. It is said to seem to be a warning sign because the agent has different elements that, when tracking or scanning the problem, make her to believe that it's something different. The agent is equipped with its behavioral richness partially, there is a sound problem perhaps, partially from heritage, partly from accumulation of an experience, and partially from trial and error. This richness allows her to respond in a variety of ways depending on how contemplates the set of variables. If the agent errs in her judgment, she may pay dearly for her error, but if she doesn't err, her benefit may increase. Hence, a high cognitive flexibility is a more powerful strategy than a mechanism that highly discriminates between two values, yes, no, existing, absence. The weak side of a high cognitive flexibility could be an extreme sensitivity to constantly revise alternative responses to the environment. While the first cognitive strategy allows the agent to respond to the surrounding in a multivariable way, but risking her integrity of functioning when interpreting several factors at the same time, the second one allows the agent to avoid unnecessary confusions, but risking her integrity of functioning when interpreting only one science over-evaluated. I'm finishing. As Sterling has pointed out, for a greater adaptive success, an organism is expected to be capable of creating representation of the variables that are at stake in the actional and communicative context. The intentional systems are those ones capable of doing so. When robust tracking mechanisms are being used by sophisticated intentional systems, like humans, they guide the action by means of decoupled representations. This is, by records of the environment that are relevant for several possible actions, but functionally speaking, not specific to any of them. In social psychology, decoupling has been analyzed with slightly different emphases, although keeping the core idea. This approach helps to grasp the developmental dimension. On describing the system of infantile reasoning, many authors point out that the system is composed of two subsystems. By embracing the hypothesis of joint action understanding of false belief in children, this author describes subsystem 1 as the one that allows children to attribute to agents with whom interact both motivational states, goals, disposition, and epistemic states, what the agent knows and doesn't. Subsystem 2, in turn, extends 1, allowing for counterfactual states to be attributed to agents, including in this state false belief and pretended belief. When an agent states information about a scene that is incompatible with the information available to the child, System 2 allows the infant to represent these divergences. These decoupled mechanisms allow to specifically creating a separate representation of the scene incorporating the false belief and or the intended belief of the agent, facilitating the infant to predict and interpret the action of the agent. The reason for those authors to propose this division range from neurophysiological evidence to the difficulty that people with autism have to represent false or pretended belief in the agent with whom they interact. The last two paragraphs. Conceived as the cognitive ability to change perspective, this is where I relate the random notion of perspective taking with the coupled representation. Conceived as the cognitive ability to change perspective, adopt that of the agent, inhibits information and uncoupled from the immediate, direct, and transparent environment. The functional spectrum of subsystem 2 is very powerful and of fundamental importance, ranging from momentarily incorporating false beliefs to participant in pretender worlds. Subsystem 2 was generated by an evolutionary pressure to maintain the positivity of the group to which one belongs. Positivity means preventing aggressive confrontation, avoiding pain and embarrassing emotions, softening uncomfortable situations, or expanding feeling of trust. People working on this research have carried out experiments of various types with infants to test this hypothesis of joint action, which makes them understand why we do not care so much about deception at times. And we accept fake things and pretend feelings. To the coupling from direct experience and stimulus help to put ourselves in the place of others. Thank you very much.